And we are back in the 10 by 10 by 10 alien-free Tangent Cube. Right now. Kyle just teleported in from wherever he was. So I have this other article. I haven't read this one, but I read part of it, and it's basically it's talking about Japan's problem with mass disappearances. Okay, it says it's called Japan's Evaporated People and the Town of the Vanished, and this is from the same guy, the one who's fascinated by disappearances, the one who wrote all the other articles we were reading. So, people vanish all over the world for a variety of reasons, ranging from the mundane to the more mysterious and even supernatural. And while this may seem to be a phenomenon confined to a sparsely populated or remote areas, this is not always true. In the island nation of Japan, one can find one of the most bustling, crowded cities in the world, Tokyo. This is a vast jungle of concrete and high-rises crisscrossed by countless roads, highways, train lines, and webs of subway systems. And it is also a place where tens of thousands of people regularly drop off the face of the earth. Not only is this a mecca of disappearances, but nestled within this advanced metropolis is a place where the vanished go. It is a place where they become shadows in a sense, husks of their former selves, perpetually cloaked in secrecy and mystery. This is the strange story of Japan's evaporated people and the town they call home. One very unusual cultural trend in Japan in recent times has been that of what are called the Johatsu, or roughly translated to the rather creepy-sounding evaporated people. Johatsu. These are people of all ages and walks of life, both men and women, who suddenly orchestrate their own vanishing, dropping out of society and disappearing without a trace, never to be found, leaving behind confusion, mystery, and concerned family members who rarely get any answers. While disappearances happen all over the world, and there are obviously those in many cultures who choose to fall off the grid, in Japan there are estimated to have been around at least 100,000 since the 1990s.
Dang.
An astronomical amount considering the country's population of approximately 127 million. The reasons for the Johatsu phenomenon are many, but mostly can probably be boiled down to Japan's society of conformity, high expectations, and shame. Here, the group is valued more than the individual. Uniqueness is discouraged, and the nail that sticks out is often hammered back down. For students, they are expected to enter a good university, which necessitates taking stringent entrance examinations that require studying practically every moment of their free time. Once in society, they will be more often than not be subjected to Japan's fanatical work ethic with harsh deadlines and countless hours of unpaid overtime. Indeed, the work environment is so taxing that Japan is probably unique in that it has its own word for death by overwork, karoshi, which affects hundreds or thousands or possibly even thousands of people per year. You just die at work because you've been there too long. No sleep.
Dang.
For those who cannot fit in, who cannot pass their tests, or who lose their jobs, great shame can be brought down on them and even their families. It is due to this exacting, unforgiving environment that many such people seek to escape in some form. For others, it might be because of an abusive marriage or severe gambling debts, but in all cases, there is a desire to escape. It is for this reason that Japan's suicide rate is estimated to be around 60% higher than the global average. And for many others, the answer simply lies in vanishing. They cut all ties with the world they once knew, change their names, sometimes even their appearances, and wipe their slates clean, shedding their old life in order to find some sense of freedom from the oppressive society that has shunned them. In most cases, they are never heard from again, leaving uncertainty as to what happened to them, or even if they are alive or dead. French journalist Lena Mager, who wrote the definitive report on this phenomenon entitled The Vanished, The Evaporated People of Japan in Stories and Photographs, spent years studying the Johatsu and said of this propensity for some people to erase themselves from society, quote, "It's so taboo. It's something you can't really talk about. But people can disappear because there's another society underneath Japan's society. When people disappear, they know they can find a way to survive. To disappear in a country as modern as Japan, with all the techniques of tracing with social networks, I thought that it was amazing." There are numerous tales that have come back from some of these evaporated people that shed light on the reasons for vanishing. One which was in Mager's book is the sad story of an engineer known only as Norihiro. He had lost his job but was too ashamed to tell his wife about it, so he at first chose to continue to act as if he were still employed. Every day he would put on his suit and tie as usual, going through the motions, and would head off to work. He would then spend the rest of his day sitting somewhere alone, even staying out late to simulate the overtime work he would be expected to do or the drinking parties he would have to attend, and then he would head home. However, with no incoming salary, there was only so long he could keep up this charade. Knowing that it was only a matter of time before he was caught in his web of deceit and terrified of telling his wife the truth, he chose one day to just go off and keep on going, never looking back and not even leaving a note behind. He would say of his experience, "I couldn't do it anymore. After 19 hours, I was still waiting because I used to go out for drinks with my bosses and colleagues. I would roam around, and when I finally returned home, I got the impression my wife and son had doubts. I felt guilty. I didn't have a salary to give them anymore. I could certainly take back my old identity, but I don't want my family to see me in this state. Look at me. I look like nothing. I am nothing." Another such tale concerns a construction worker called Yuichi, who in the 1990s was tasked with taking care of his sick mother. However, he found that the expenses involved in doing so were taking their toll, and he realized he did not have the means to care for her any longer. One day, he took his mother to a low-scale, cheap hotel, calmly checked her in, and proceeded to vanish off the face of the earth. In yet another story, a martial artist called Ichiro was happily married with a child, and his life seemed to be in order. The couple had just bought a new house and started a Chinese restaurant, but then the stock market crashed and they found themselves in extreme debt. In the end, Ichiro and his whole family decided that the only answer was to evaporate. Ichiro would later reflect on this decision, saying, "People are cowards. They all want to throw in the towel one day to disappear and reappear somewhere nobody knows them. I never envisioned running away to be an end in itself. You know, a disappearance is something you can never shake. Fleeing is a fast track towards death." So, let's see if he goes. Once vanished, many of these evaporated find themselves in whole towns or areas of the city that have fallen off the grid to cater to them. One of the most notorious such places is called Sanya, a rundown suburb of Tokyo that once served as a home for thousands of blue-collar workers who helped to propel Japan's growth during its boom years, but which is now a gritty sprawl of dirt-cheap housing and low-priced shops, hotels, and restaurants, essentially a slum where the down and destitute congregate. Sanya is a difficult place to find and doesn't even officially exist, having over the years faded from maps to become just another shoddy, nondescript neighborhood of Tokyo. And this is exactly how its denizens want it. It is a perfect place to fade away and disappear. Taxi drivers avoid venturing into the neighborhood. The only ones that go there, they say, are those excluded from the good life and forgotten by everyone, the nameless. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Let's see. Many of these vanished people have left loved ones behind who often have no idea what has happened to them or even if they are alive, and it is not easy to track any of these people down. Part of the problem is the way that things are done in Japan and the huge amount of red tape overlying people's personal information. Here, privacy is nearly impenetrable. For instance, it is practically impossible to access public records, and such information can only be accessed in criminal cases by police, while johatsu cases are not classified as such. Further complicating things is that not even police are allowed to look at financial information such as ATM transactions, banking information, or other such records, leaving them completely blocked off from the outside world. There are also no social security numbers in Japan, and if a person has not registered themselves with City Hall, then it is as if they do not exist at all.
Man,
and of course, authorities pretend that this problem doesn't exist at all. There's no, and then like Japan's culture of silence about this makes it impossible to talk about it with anybody. It's very strange. So he says, "It is all vaguely spooky and somewhat tragic that these people should want to shun their old lives and take up a ghostly existence. It is hard to imagine what must be going through their minds or the decisions they have made or the circumstances that have forced them into this self-imposed exile. It is also rather baffling that in a crowded city, these people could so completely erase themselves and live out shadow lives right in one of the biggest cities in the world that they could so totally melt away without a trace. It really puts a sinister tint on the bright lights of this mega city." He lives there. "That we can look out at its countless glittering lights which hide within them this underworld of lost souls."
Damn. That's crazy.
I didn't know about that until I saw this article. I had no idea. And I've loved Japan's culture for a long time, so that's...
But it still seems to me to match sort of what they do, like the seppuku or whatever.
Seppuku, exactly. That's what I thought of too. You get too much shame and you have to disappear and like erase yourself from your family life.
Yeah.
That
and
way,
so we would look at it like, well, you just left your wife and kid, and but you don't want to bring shame on them,
right?
And so it's like the way their culture is designed, in order to relieve your child, of your shame, you have to vanish,
exactly,
right? And then that's almost an honorable thing to do, right? Like this, what is it, seppuku?
Seppuku,
seppuku is honorable.
Right.
In like, if you're ashamed and you do that, then you bring back honor on your name.
It's interesting because like in our culture, it's never honorable to do that. Like killing yourself is always a coward's way out, whatever, you're fleeing problems, whatever. But in their culture, it's a way to like, if you're horribly shamed like that, then committing seppuku is a way of like erasing that shame.
Yeah.
Right? Your name will not be shamed even in history, So like major generals who like, or like leaders of wars who lost, that would bring huge shame upon them and their family and everything like that. But if they committed seppuku, then they would be remembered as being noble and heroic and everything like that. And that they did the right thing. It's very interesting. It's like you can kind of see in some ways that I mean, I don't know. Like, would you judge a culture like that had built up this thing around suicide as being there's something wrong with it? Or do you like in some ways it seems to be noble, it like because that culture views it that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
It's like in Western civilization, suicide is not noble. It never is, Like, okay, well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes it might be.
Well, it can be, but it's
if you're sacrificing yourself,
right?
To
it wouldn't
save
be
other
considered
people.
suicide, right?
Yeah.
It's not considered suicide.
Right.
Like when an army guy jumps on the grenade,
right? That's suicidal.
It's suicide.
Yeah. But it's
considered.
It's
honorable.
a sacrifice, is what we call it.
It's a sacrifice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they're doing. So really, you get rid of the word suicide because that's not what it is. To them, it's a self-sacrifice for the betterment of their name,
right?
Which
of other people and
other people that
and their family.
have their name.
Yes, exactly.
So it is a sacrifice. That's that, and their culture developed in such a way where that is a true sacrifice,
right?
And in some ways, it's like sad, but at the same time, that you can't help that, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's the way their culture is, so it is honorable,
right? And in some ways, I wish that it was in Western. Like, just imagine if like massive failure made like prominent people have to kill themselves. That would be badass. That would be great because like it would get rid of a lot of problems.
Right? But no culture is free of massive problems.
Right. Yeah, the corruption. The corruption can be anywhere, but I'm just saying, like, that would be awesome. Instead of having people that are like powerful stay there and keep doing horrible things, like if they just had to kill themselves and they fucked up, then that's it. Next guy.
Right, but notice the emperor
is God.
That.
Right.
Yeah.
He can't fail. Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword. Or no. I should have said double standard.
Samurai swords are not double-edged.
That's right.
Okay, so this other topic I have is something we haven't talked about on Snake Bros in a while. Pyramids.
Hell yeah.
Bring it back to pyramids.
Man, I've been wanting to talk about those giant triangles.
So this is from Underworld, which is Graham Hancock's very awesome but less famous book. It's called Underworld, the Mysterious Origins of Civilization. It's the one he wrote after Fingerprints of the Gods. Okay.
All right.
It's not the sequel to It kind of works as a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods because he writes it right afterwards and he's continuing his exploration. The idea of Underworld, I don't know if I've said this before, but the idea is that after Fingerprints of the Gods, he realizes that to look for this vanished ancient civilization, the best place to look is underwater.
Yeah.
Because of the massive sea level rise.
400-foot sea level rise, yeah.
So Underworld is about that entire global quest that he went on. Him and his wife learned to scuba dive, and then went all over the world scuba diving in places where legends said that there were underwater cities or ruins or whatever. Okay.
I hope my son is a journalist. Because that's how you can do real archaeology.
That's right. Maverick archaeology. So this is part 3 of Underworld. It's chapter 13 called Pyramid Islands. So the first part of it is a quote from Thor Heyerdahl, which is kind of a famous Indiana Jones type of globe-trotting archaeologist, swashbuckler, badass. Okay. Yeah. The Redan came long before any other Maldivian. Okay, so I don't know how to say this. Is it Maldives?
The Maldives.
Okay, Maldives. The Redan came long before any other Maldivians. Maldivians? Between them and the present population, other people had also come, but none were as potent as the Redan, and there were many of them. They were not only used to sail, they not only use sails but also oars, and therefore move with great speed at sea. That's from Thor Heyerdahl. So this is the Maldives. Imagine you are flying in a specially equipped plane under an endless blue sky over endless blue ocean. The plane is very fast and maneuverable, and you can go where you want in it, and yet all you see is blue, just blue above and blue below. Suddenly, in the distance, far away where the sky meets water, your eye catches a glint of something on the horizon. You turn the plane towards it, skimming it 200 meters over the ocean with little waves breaking into white horses below you. Soon, land comes into view, just a curving feather of sand no more than 1 kilometer wide and 3 kilometers long, adorned with plumes of lush green palm leaves, seeming to float in a sea that is now not merely blue, but that grades into incredible shades of azure and turquoise. Passing directly overhead, you see an area cleared of jungle, packed with tiny houses built out of white coralline limestone blocks and separated from one another by an orderly network of streets, brushed with light coralline limestone sand, so that the whole Lilliputian village glares like a mirror in the morning sun. You take the plane higher to get a better view, remembering this is an imaginary journey and you can go as high as a satellite if you want. And you see that the stunningly beautiful but tiny inhabited island over which you have just flown is part of an even more stunningly beautiful ring of even tinier uninhabited islands and sandbars that are also shaped as rings and crescents and ellipses. This ring, in turn, reveals itself to be just one of countless other rings and crescents and ellipses lying side by side to form a much larger ellipse in the ocean, the outer rim of a great Maldivian atoll, 50 kilometers wide and more than 100 kilometers long. The atoll encloses a lagoon of hardly smaller dimensions, since the rim islands themselves are narrow. And within the lagoon are scattered dozens more small coral islands and sandbars in which the essential patterns of the entire Maldives chain, circles, ellipses, and crescents, repeat themselves again and again.
I think I've actually seen that on Google Earth.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Like I was, scrolling around with all the labels off.
Oh, yeah. What is that? Yes. What is that?
Yeah, dude.
You urge the plane higher still. Look down at last on the entire archipelago stretched out below you around the curve of the earth and discover that it consists of an assembly of similar atolls, 26 of them in all, strung together like the pearls in a necklace and draped in the form of an elongated ellipse 754 kilometers long from north to south and 118 kilometers wide from east to west. Each atoll is the product of coral growth around the edges of a submerged volcanic mountain peak. And so here he has a quote from somebody. In a scenario played out over hundreds of thousands of years, coral first builds up around the shores of a volcanic landmass, producing a fringing reef. Then, when the island, often simply the exposed peak of a submarine mountain, begins slowly to sink, the coral continues to grow upwards at about the same rate. This forms a barrier reef which is separated from the shore of the sinking island by a lagoon. By the time the island is completely submerged, the coral growth has become the base for an atoll, circling the place where the volcanic landmass or island used to be. The enclosed lagoon accumulates sand and rubble formed by broken coral, and the level of this lagoon floor also builds up over the subsiding landmass. Coral growth can also create reefs and islands within the lagoon. That's why you get all these weird crescent shapes and circles and stuff.
That's cool, dude.
The lagoon floors are all submerged today. And this is back to Graham Hancock talking. But at the last glacial maximum, which I don't know if we've ever explained that, with the LGM, the last glacial maximum was like 25,000. It was the last time the ice was at its peak before the Younger Dryas. The last glacial maximum, when sea level was lower by about 120 meters, the huge basins within each and every one of the Maldives atolls were all dry land. So you fly the plane lower again, spiraling downwards towards the sea, zooming in on one atoll, one emerging emerald green island. Within a beach perimeter of startlingly white sand, it seems at first to be just thick palm jungle from one side to another and apparently uninhabited. Then you spot a clearing in the jungle less than half a kilometer from the sea. You fly closer. In the heart of the clearing, with a tree growing on its summit, is what looks like a conical hill. Closer still, and you discover that the hill is not a hill at all, and it is not quite conical either. It is a ruined and partially collapsed pyramid about the height of a 2-story building.
Wow.
The 4-day trip that we made into the Maldives immediately before returning to India on 23rd of February 2001 was not intended to be an expedition to search for underwater ruins, hardly practicable in such a short time, in an archipelago of almost 1,200 tiny islands extending through 8 degrees of latitude across 90,000 square kilometers of ocean. In all that mass of blue water, the total area of dry land is presently less than 300 square kilometers. And many scientists are of the opinion that even this remnant may be submerged before the end of the 21st century by rising sea levels linked to global warming. The threat of extinction that hangs over the Maldives and its unique culture serves as a reminder that the world's oceans can and do rise, and that when they do, they swallow up low-lying countries and all of their history, with not a trace left visible above the water. And if that is true today, deep in what has so far been the most placid interglacial of the past 2.5 million years, then it doesn't take much imagination to work out how things must have been in the world when sea levels were rising crazily between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. Besides, thanks to the ingenuity of modern science, we have inundation maps to tell us the story. So one of the best things about this book is that he has these inundation maps. Okay, so he found this, after writing Fingerprints of the Gods, he found this geologist who has this whole team of people, hydrologists and everything, that work with him. And they have been getting all this data from all this various different, just all kinds of different things, that ice cores, tree rings, everything. And they've been mapping the sea level rises in various parts of the world, okay, globally, and then they wrote this enormous piece of software that accesses all this data in these enormous databases of all this different stuff, and they can like build maps of various different eras of where the shoreline was
in timelines and
in stuff. Timelines. And so Graham Hancock gets connected with this guy, and so he can just request like, hey, so what did the Maldives look like at like 15,000 BC? 10,000 BC, 9,000 BC, 7,000 BC, 5,000 BC. And this guy sends him these maps, and you can see the shoreline just like shrink, the ocean getting deeper and deeper. So when he dives on these ruins underwater, he can figure out really precisely when the last time that area was above land or above sea level. So that's one of the best things about this book is the inundation maps from this guy that he gets.
That's awesome.
Okay, so he says, thanks to the ingenuity of modern science, we have inundation maps to tell us the story. Perhaps not still not with 100% accuracy, although that is being refined all of the time, but based on the best data presently available. And what the maps tell us about the Maldives is that the necklace of scattered coral atolls of which the archipelago now consists was almost continuous land at the last glacial maximum, broken only by intermittent channels, bays, and inlets, occupying perhaps 50,000 square kilometers out of the total of 90,000 square kilometers that the Republic presently encloses within its territorial waters. In other words, some 49,700 square kilometers of the Maldives that was above water between 21 and 16,000 years ago is underwater today. Okay, that's a lot of land.
Crazy.
In my investigation of the riddle of Kumari Kandam, which is one of the legendary ancient now submerged cities of India, okay, I could hardly ignore, or not cities, I'm sorry, this was an ancient nation or country or landmass.
Okay.
They call it Kumari Kandam. He says, I could hardly ignore this lost antediluvian landmass in the Indian Ocean that had stretched towards the equator from a point roughly parallel to the extended southern tip of Tamil Nadu during the Ice Age. Even today, the much-reduced Maldives are a barrier to shipping, but 16,000 years ago, had anyone been sailing in these parts, they would have been confronted by an 800-kilometer-long line of cliffs running north to south, effectively blocking the east-west passage, because these are massive mountains coming right up out of the water.
Yeah.
Okay. Hypothetical Ice Age seafarers wanting to sail east or west would have been more or less obliged to make their way through one of two deep water channels. The 1.5-degree channel, so named because it slices across the Maldives 1.5 degrees north of the equator, and the equatorial channel, which then as now about 50 kilometers wide, which separates South Huvadu Atoll in the northern hemisphere from the Adu Atoll in the southern. So, rather than the dots in the ocean that they are today, the Maldives 16,000 years ago would have been formidable. If such a thing as Kumari Kandam ever did exist, centered as the myths suggest on the antediluvian coastal margins of southern India and Sri Lanka, then might it not have also included the Great Barrier Islands of the Maldives just a few hundred kilometers to the south? As I noted in Chapter 11, such a hypothesis would explain the old Tamil traditions which tell us that Kumari Kandam once extended into the Indian Ocean some 700 kavthams, which is 1,500 kilometers. It's an ancient measurement system beyond modern Cape Comorin. Okay, so he says the ancient history of the Maldive Islands is almost completely unknown, and their inundation profile suggests that their prehistory, if any, may have been lost beneath the rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. The matter is further complicated by the presence of an alarming gravity anomaly. Now, remember we talked about this before. It's near the Maldives, these troughs in the ocean. an alarming gravity anomaly centered here. In layman's terms, what this means is that the archipelago is situated at the bottom of an enormous trough in the surface of the Indian Ocean itself. This trough being created by strong local gravitational fields, which some believe may be linked to the massive sunken mountains on top of which the Maldives atolls have grown. Like other gravity anomalies, several similar troughs have been measured in the world's oceans by satellites. It is not certain that this one has always remained exactly in the same location, or that its depth has always remained the same, or that it will always do so in the future.
So the ocean just dips down there for some reason.
The surface of the ocean. Remember when we were reading...
We were talking about the Bermuda Triangle. We were talking about...
Yeah, but I was reading this part from Ivan Sanderson's book, and he was talking about how there are some shit... The Chinese bought these old junks, these like practically falling apart ships, and they couldn't climb the wall of the trough because the motors were so terrible that they like had to be tugged up the freaking slope in the water.
It's crazy,
what?
Man.
What is going on? So, very little archaeology of any kind has ever been done in the Maldives, but the view of most Orthodox scholars is that, quote, the first settlers probably arrived from Ceylon not later than AD 500 and were Buddhists, unquote. Other authorities argue for an earlier date, back to the 500 BC, and note some South Indian, specifically Tamil, Hindu religious influence. Thor Heyerdahl, who is one of the few to have conducted archaeological expeditions in the Maldives and whose book The Maldives Mystery is the only serious attempt to get to grips with the problems of this island's ancient history, believes that they were settled much earlier than that, perhaps by 2000 or even 3000 BC, and that they may have played a part in an archaic Indian Ocean trading network involving ancient Egypt and the Mesopotamian and Indus-Sarasvati civilizations. Okay. So far, Heyerdahl has not been supported by the few carbon dates obtained from the Maldives, none older than AD 540, but in this, as other matters, he may yet be proved right. What we do not know about these islands far exceeds what we do know. So, I want to take a break there and kind of talk about what we've already gone through. But like the whole Pyramid Island thing is basically like a bunch of these little tiny atolls have these enormous pyramids on them, and nobody knows who built them or how old they are or like what are they doing there or what are they for or what's inside of them.
That's crazy, man. I gotta check this out.
Pyramid Islands. Like, so Thor Heyerdahl goes through and like looks at all the... What was that? Oh, that was my lighter. Sorry about that. So he goes through and like looks at all these and I'll read about this in a little bit, but he basically is like figuring out that, like, in a nutshell, these can't have been built by the people who have settled it recently. Like, in other words, the people who settled it in like 500 AD did not build these, right? Those were, and they're much older than that. And there's also evidence that some of them are deep underwater in the parts that were only above sea level 16,000 years ago.
Wow. And they're not covered in coral, or?
Some of them are, yeah. They're covered in coral. But you can tell, like, a pyramid covered in coral is still a pyramid.
Yeah. It's freaking awesome, man.
So what's the most recent glacial period peaked 21,500 years ago during the last glacial maximum. Yeah. But it's only 1,500 years old, yeah. All right. So, like, the other thing I think is interesting about this area is this whole thing about the troughs. Like, Graham Hancock refers to it as a gravity anomaly, but that doesn't really work, you know?
Yeah, because everything would be heavier there, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, if it could pull a trough into the ocean, then you should be noticeably heavier there. And it doesn't explain why. Okay. I think that, and tell me if you think this is wrong, but if there was a massive gravity anomaly that made gravity more powerful in this area, shouldn't it build a mound in the water? It should pull water towards it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
Like, there's a trough, not a hill.
Right.
Like, because since water can move, it should actually get pulled towards this gravity anomaly and actually be...
Right, because it would be being pulled from the left and the right and in every direction, 360 degrees. It'd be being pulled towards it.
It should kind of be stuck to it, like over top of it. Should be a little mound.
Yeah, that
These
makes
are troughs. So...
That's a great observation. I like that. Really what I thought of was that depending on the Coriolis force and turbulence in the water and stuff, you might have a pretty well sustained
Oh, like a maelstrom. Ah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. A maelstrom, like a giant, slowly moving whirlpool. That It's a very good idea. Except it's weird that it's over top of this like very shallow part when there's very deep ocean all around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
But so you've basically got these enormous, enormous ancient volcanic mountains sticking out from the very bottom of the seabed all the way up to where they're just barely below the surface, and this coral has grown on top of them, right?
Yeah.
And all of that is down in this trough. That's pretty weird.
Yeah, so, okay. I have seen a mound of water in the middle of a pool, like a lagoon, right?
Okay.
Look out. I went to a spring-fed river in Florida, and it had this enormous spring. It was just like the whole lagoon. It was pretty big, probably like 5 acres or something. And in the center of it, it was all about 10 to 12 feet deep. But in the center, there was just this hole in the rock. I mean, just a wide, maybe 8-9 foot diameter hole or something like that. And it just went down 30 feet. And it was just a huge open cavern under there. And the water was coming out so fast. It's like this, there was 2 springs, and they both just created this massive river that was hauling ass. Like we tubed it, right? And just like it was moving fast. Wow. Crystal clear water. And when you're standing on the dock at that lagoon looking out, in the center of the lagoon, there's just this mound of water. I mean, it's like a little hill, right? It's coming out so fast. It's just making this.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to swim to it.
Right, of course.
Like you're trying to get trying to get up on top of this hill. It's hard. But you would notice the same or the opposite effect if it was draining down the hole.
Yeah.
Right. Now that would create a whirlpool unless the hole was like a crack going along the base of the mountain range.
Right. So it was all just falling into that.
It's just going into, and it just makes this trough.
Yeah.
So like it could be coming out somewhere else, right? Like in
Florida,
the world.
In the lagoon.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I don't know. The idea that there would be a sustained draining and then coming out, it doesn't make any sense, right? I don't know. It's crazy. I don't know how to explain that.
Think about that, folks.
But water
there are valleys in the oceans.
Yeah. It's just weird, man.
Trough is not the right word. It's a freaking valley, like the watcher says. It's a water valley.
Yeah.
I actually think that, like, I don't know about this, but I think, like, maybe a long, thin crack would end up making multiple little whirlpools, wouldn't it? Do you think? Probably. Like, it's just like,
it just doesn't make sense that the thing could be sustained for so long.
Right.
Like, where's it going?
Yeah. Yeah. To the moon. Which is why we need to go there and get it back.
That's right. Billions of tons of water ice on.
Yeah, there's a giant down there, and it's just taking the water to the moon. All right, we're gonna take one more break, and we'll come back for the last segment of the show.
Contribute to our pyramid scheme. Send us straight to pyramids. We could come back and report on that. I want to learn how to dive. All right, we're back.
Let's get back to pyramids to dive to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing better than walking up to a pyramid in a desert would be diving into a pyramid in the ocean.
Yeah, that would be pretty freaking
Basically,
awesome.
It looks the same, but it's blue. It's still on sand and it's a pyramid.
Yeah.
Okay. So, picking up from where I left off from Graham Hancock here, he's quoting from, he says, "What we do not know about these islands far exceeds what we do know." And then he quotes again from Thor Heyerdahl. "Usually the history of a nation begins with a potent king founding a dynasty. The Maldives is a definite exception. A long dynasty of kings was already there before known Maldive history started. This kingdom ended when Maldive history began. The last king was made a sultan by a pious foreigner who came by sea and started local history. He caused all the kings to disappear into oblivion except one, the one he himself converted. With neither arms nor with any Maldive blood in his veins, he introduced a new faith, new laws, and founded the present Muslim Maldive state." In other words, okay, so this is back to Graham Hancock. In other words, not only has the Maldives suffered the incursions of the sea and the usual depredations of time, but also it was converted in the year AD 1153 to the Islamic faith, which led to further attrition of ancient structures, artifacts, and inscriptions. As my old friend Peter Marshall, author of Journey to the Maldives, explains, recorded history only begins about the time of the conversion of the Maldives to Islam. As Christians in Europe began their calendar from the birth of Christ and tend to dismiss all earlier religions as pagan, so Maldivians follow the Islamic calendar. Until recently, they had very little interest in what happened before. Not only was Maldivian pre-Islamic history suppressed, but most pre-Muslim artifacts were destroyed. So what archaeologists are left to work with in the Maldives, above the water at least, and nobody has yet looked underwater, is almost certainly just a fraction, and perhaps an extremely unrepresentative fraction, of what was once there. Even so, buried deep in the jungle of islands up and down the archipelago, some uninhabited and all off-limits to tourists, there are several dozen partially collapsed and heavily overgrown pyramids up to 10 meters high with their sides oriented to the cardinal directions. Although in a state of ruin today, these mounds of compacted earth and stone, in some cases with stepped courses of closely jointed megalithic masonry, to be seen exposed under the earth fill, have a somber and looming presence as they emerge out of the jungle. Called Hawita by the local people, the precise function and origin of these mounds have not been confirmed, though the carbon dates put their construction between roughly AD 500 and 700. Most scholars think they are Buddhist stupas, relic mounds, which they probably are. Unimpeachably Buddhist sculptures, reliefs on stone, and artifacts have been found amongst the ruins, and some of the pieces are recognizably similar to other Buddhist work of the same period from India and Sri Lanka. So there is no doubt that Buddhism was extremely present, or extensively present, on these islands in the centuries before the coming of Islam. Indeed, a Sanskrit text of Vajrayana Buddhism dating back to the 9th or 10th century AD is the earliest surviving legible inscription thus far found in the Maldives. Still, as a number of observers have noted, there seems to be something strange about this Maldivian Buddhism. Could it be some other religious influence showing through, maybe a form of Hinduism that preceded the Buddhist faith to the Maldives? Certain striking sculptures of grotesque human faces with bulging eyes, twirled mustachios, and curved cat-like fangs may, quote, recall Hindu deities, unquote, admits Arne Skjoldvold, an archaeologist with the Kon-Tiki Museum, who nevertheless prefers to explain such images as expressions of localized subculture of Tantric Buddhism. There may be clues in Dehevi, the Maldivian language. It belongs to the Indo-European family and is related to Sanskrit and thus also to Sinhalese, one of the two languages of Sri Lanka, the other being Tamil. Sinhalese has been heavily influenced and modified by its contact with Tamil, and according to Clarence Maloney, a Tamil Dravidian sublayer exists in Dehevi also, which suggests that Hinduism was present in the Maldives before the Buddhist period. Interestingly, large numbers of phallic sculptures have been recovered in archaeological excavations in the Maldives, for example, amid the ruins of a vast temple complex in North Nilantu Atoll. I was able to study a collection of such objects from different parts of the archipelago, and in my opinion, despite some idiosyncrasies, they are nothing more nor less than Sivalinga. Okay. Sivalinga is like that's a whole other show. The linga they call them phallic, but I'm not sure that's what they are. They seem to be, they're like,
rockets.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Either that or they're Andice arrowheads.
Right. The most ancient Sivalinga in India are almost impossible to see. I mean, you can see them, but they're so covered in decorations. I don't know what to call them. Religious hangings and
oh yeah.
It's beautiful. They're covered in like all this crystals and like draperies and other things, but you can't actually see the thing underneath it, whatever it is. And some of them, so it's like, imagine this, like, and I wanted to talk about this, so this kind of moves us into this topic, rock cut temples, which we were having a good conversation about the other day.
Yeah.
So in India, there's tons and tons of these rock cut temples, and a lot of them are based around Sivalinga, okay? Siva being a Buddhist god, Siva, okay? So the linga are these like megalithic things, but they're usually rock cut. Some of them are like menhirs, it's like a stone that's been stood up or whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are actually, they're enormous, like columns or plinths or whatever, but they're rough, but they're cut directly out of the rock. And then these temples have been cut out around them or built up around them. So somebody a long time ago comes in and like cuts out this giant chunk of a mountain and leaves this tower of stone inside of like basically a cut cube, like, so imagine like you cut like part of a cube out of the side of the mountain and leave just this enormous straight column in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And then somebody comes along later and builds this enormous temple around that with megalithic blocks, carves it with all these deities and everything like that, and then covers the original the original thing of stone is in the central chamber, and it's covered with all this stuff, and they do all these rituals with it and everything.
That's crazy.
But what's the original thing? Right? And when I looked at this, and I think Graham Hancock goes into this some, but he's looking more at the mythology, but I'm looking at these giant towers, and I'm thinking of like, okay, so there are so many temples in India, right? And if you look at them, like if I was at this giant tower, maybe standing on top of it, I could see to the next one, wherever it was.
Okay.
And then if I got to that one, I could see to the first one and to the next one, right? So they remind me of surveying markers. If you were if you were able to cut stone like it was butter and you were surveying the whole planet and you're trying to do it really fast, you'd leave these giant markers in these enormous mountains that you're surveying through. I don't know.
Dude, that's crazy.
And it is Siva, like, said to have like created the world and formed it in all of its tiny little intricacies, and then and like marked his passing with these things.
That's crazy. I don't. But I was looking at the pictures you put in the encyclopedia.
Yes.
Of all the rock cut temples, and I'm just like, what is going on with that?
Yeah. So rock cut temples. Let's move to that topic. So most temples are built by stacking stuff up.
Yeah.
But at some point in the deep past, like no one actually knows when these things are made because you can't really date it. So we can use what is it called when you can tell when the last time something was exposed to light or whatever?
Like the patina or whatever?
No, it's like it's a kind of dating type.
I don't know.
Sivalinga. Launch pad and spaceship is what Phil Watcher says that he knows because he's in space.
Yeah, he just posted a picture of the Sivalinga.
A small Sivalinga, yeah. They found these things carved out of rock in riverbeds. Like I've seen pictures of like there's water running around them. There's just tons of them. Like somebody came in and cut the rock out and left all these things like sticking up out of the water.
That's crazy.
Yeah. What is it called? Anyway, there's a way to tell like when like stone, when this surface of the stone was last exposed to light. So in other words, if it's a block that's has other stuff stacked on top of it,
yeah,
then you can kind of like take a sample from underneath the block above it, and you can figure out how long ago, sort of, when it was placed there, when it was cut from the quarry and moved out into the sunlight, and then put underneath another block, right? For some reason, I can't remember what that's called right now, but
the only problem with it is like if it had been repaired at some point,
if somebody took it apart and put it back together, yeah.
So you'd have to take a lot of them. You'd take a lot of samples. Luminescence
dating, yeah. So you can't do luminescence on rock cut because that's not how it was made.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now,
The last time it was exposed to the sun was when they cut it.
Well, what I mean is like, yeah, like you could.
Well, the last time it was exposed to the sun was yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. Right. And the interior parts were never exposed to the sun.
Have never been exposed to the sun. Dude, that's the crazy thing. Like, if you look at the pictures in the encyclopedia on the website, brothersoftheserpent.com, like the ones from in India, the interiors are what was really blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I was trying to figure out, like, how do you plan this?
Yes, that's been my problem with the rock cut stuff ever since I saw them. I'm like, how?
Like, there's no modern equivalent. Like,
Right.
There's, I was talking to Russ about bunkers. Like, we dig bunkers and they just, like, drill down or whatever, rough stone drilling. And then they'll, pour concrete walls and stuff to make them smooth and everything.
Yeah, so we've dug train tunnels through mountains.
Yeah.
We've dug like traffic tunnels beneath the riverbeds of or the underneath like harbors and stuff like that to get into New York. There's like various, but we don't do this. Like we like rough drill, with some enormous drilling equipment or whatever, like that can actually drive through the rock and it cuts and then pushes the stuff behind it and then you have to clean all that stuff out. But it just leaves this rough tunnel. And then, like you said, they'll brick it up or they'll concrete it up or whatever. But no one goes in and like does this and carves pillars that have all this decoration around, and then all these dudes that are carved in, and then all this like sculpture and all over the place.
Yeah.
And
Like the ceiling of this one has just these arches like going through it, beautiful, and they're all the same. And then beneath the arch are like these deities or whatever, all carved out, standing up, faces sticking out, appendages or whatever. And then beneath them are these massive pillars.
Right.
And then the pillars, you can go behind them to the wall where they cut all the way back there and left all these pillars sticking out. I mean, it's just like...
Yeah, and the walls back behind the pillars, the whole thing, are like these high relief friezes of like all these people and just...
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing how you can even plan that. Like, if you're... What tool were they using where they were like, okay, we'll only go a foot that way and leave this much for this figure that's going to be carved here.
Right.
And then go down and then... There's going to be a pillar here. Like, how do you draw the plans? Like, you can't.
Right.
You can't draw the plans on a mountain, inside the mountain, right? That when you're drilling, you get to the edge of the pillar and you stop. Right? It's like, but they're perfect. They're all aligned, like, perfectly. How do you shoot that in? Like, when we build a line of pillars, you can survey the ground before you start building the pillars in a straight line.
Right.
How do you survey
snap your chalk
inside a mountain?
Your laser up there. Yeah, exactly.
How did they make the pillars all perfectly in a straight line? It's just like, just blows.
And like when you look at them, you can tell they have this machine precision. Like, in other words, that every pillar is exactly the same.
Right.
And in other words, it doesn't look like something that was done by hand. Like, you can't do that. Like, and like look, the story for most of these temples are like they call them caves in some cases. The massive caverns that were cut out by Buddhist monks, like that got bored, and had spoons or something. And you're just like, okay, no, like, I'm sorry, but I can see like that a wall of a cave might be smoothed out and then like some images done on it or whatever, but you can't 3D like cut giant chunks of mountain out and leave temples that have images and people and sculptures on every part of it.
Perfectly
and
like,
that are
symmetrical.
And just absolutely unbelievably beautiful. Like it's music in stone is what it is. Like, especially when you see the way these pillars are cut, and they're cut in this mountain granite. It's not soft rock.
Yeah. And there's the other one that's just like a hole, straight down into the top, and it's square. And they left that one of those massive like columns in there.
Yeah,
but it's all intricately carved with high relief, everything.
Yeah,
it's just mind blowing. And then where's all the material?
Yeah, the materials.
Where did it go?
Yeah.
So like with the Sphinx in Egypt, like they that's basically a rock cut
Yes.
thing, or they cut down into the rock and left the Sphinx there. But all of the boulders that came from, they didn't just like scratch it out of there. They cut these massive boulders and pulled them out, and they're squared.
Yeah.
And then they built a huge temple out of all of those. So it's like we know where that material went.
Right.
There's signs of all the material that came out of that cavity that they cut down into and left the Sphinx. But it's like, it's almost like the same people that did that.
Yeah.
You know, that was the style or whatever. You just cut it out of the rock.
Right.
And leave it. But in these, there's no temple built nearby that has all the stuff that was taken
the temple
out of
is there. It is there.
They just left the temple there.
Right. They cut this giant hole in a mountain and leave a temple that's carved and all this kind of crazy stuff. It's perfectly symmetrical, and then the material is nowhere to be found.
Yeah. And I was trying to figure out like when we build anything, we have these plans, and it's like what we were talking about with the cave situation before. It's like the way we have to survey this cave is so you're so limited on how you can actually do it. It's like you can't. It'd be the same thing. Like you're just going to cut the cave exactly as you plan it, but you can't get in there
to snap your lines,
right?
And draw your
So you might be able to say build a 3D model that would be the blueprints or design blueprints to where you could say, okay, this is what the temple's going to look like.
Yeah.
But you can't lay anything out on the ground.
Exactly.
There's no way.
Right. So how do you know you're cutting straight down at a 90 degree to the surface you just made? You can't tell. Even without machine driven modern equipment, we can't do it either. You can't do this by hand,
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Them definitely weren't butt flappers.
Right. And again, the question is where the material problem exists all over the world, like the varas that we talked about, the Daring QU, where's all the material that they pulled out of there? Like in China, the Longyu grottos, however many millions of cubic feet of stone were pulled out of all these grottos that they had dug where they left these little holes in the surface that became bottomless pools.
Yeah.
None of the material has ever been found. They don't know where it went.
Yeah. And they had to take it out of those little holes.
Right. All of it out of those little holes.
Yeah.
And then I liked your idea of the, we're talking about the shamir idea that somebody was taking it out and then that was what was making the cart ruts. Because they were dropping this shamir softened stone on the surface and then driving back to the bar and leaving ruts.
Yeah.
But there are rock cut temples in Egypt. They're in Jordan. Petra in Jordan is famous for the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's that they're down in the canyon. And is that just temple facing that's just in the canyon wall?
Yeah.
But actually, if you go look up Petra, there's tons of them. That's just one of the most famous ones because of Indiana Jones. But all in that canyon, there are enormous, beautiful, and they don't ever show you the interiors. But if you get pictures of the insides, they're the same way, just gorgeously cut out of this rock. Extensive temple or whatever they were.
What was ever found in them? I mean, was there anything found in them?
I don't know.
But I guess they've been known about for so long.
Yeah, looted in antiquity.
God, man.
Yeah,
if you want to hide
took
something,
everything that wasn't nailed down.
Don't cut an insanely badass temple in a mountain to hide it.
Yeah. But
the temple is the hidden thing. No. There's a huge hole in the mountain.
Yeah, so Kailash in India is one of the most famous Indian rock cut temples, and it is just you just look at pictures of it, and you're like, okay, somebody cut a giant cube out of the side of the mountain and left this multi-towered, think of Indian temples. They're just covered.
Every square
inch is covered in artwork, right? But that's a little bit more understandable. Still hard to explain when you're stacking up megalithic blocks and then cutting it out of that. But this was cut directly out of the mountain. And I actually have started to think that the temples that were stacked up with blocks and then cut are actually imitations of these much more ancient rock cut things. And you look at Kailash and it's the very tip of the very highest tower is like a lion. that's like standing on its hind legs and like reaching up. And like, so I'm imagining these guys, they're standing on this mountain that's the side of this, it's bare rock face. And they're like, okay, you start cutting down and you have to start cutting the top of that lion's head immediately, because it's level with the mountaintop. And you go all the way down and you leave this beautiful tower and the lion's there and you keep, and like, you haven't gotten, we build things from the ground up, and you're cutting it out. You have to at least leave a cube of rock for the lion for somebody to come later and or to me it just looks like there's the temples, and it's there. And I have some evidence for that. This is not a rock cut temple, but it's one that it's stacked up of megalithic blocks. It's called the I think it's Karnak. It's the same name as the Karnak temple in Egypt, but this is Karnak in India, and it's the Temple of the Wheels.
Yeah, those massive wheels.
It was never finished. So if you go through the pictures of Karnak's wheel, the Temple of Karnak's wheel, there's all these giant, beautiful, just unbelievably intricately carved wheels that are just sticking out of the walls of the temple.
Yeah.
But there's this one section where you can see that like all this like incredibly intricate carving is like starting from the top, or it's either going from the bottom up or starting from the top and coming down, and then it just stops and it's a flat surface. No, but it's a line all the way across all just these
perfectly straight line.
Yeah, of all these intricate like details, like people and figures and part of the wheel and everything like that. It's like a machine was going and just stopped there.
Whoa, dude, I have to see that.
Yeah,
I have to see that.
So it's I saw that and I'm like, okay. That's a machine.
Okay, so our buddy Archer has this CNC machine that has a laser.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And we had this great idea. It's like, hey, I've got this cool poem, and I've got this cool piece of wood. Put it into your laser CNC machine and burn the poem with this badass font that Russ got, and it'll be great. Well, the CNC machine kept stopping in the middle of the process, but the computer sets it up to move in a certain way, and it's basically cutting the poem at an angle, like almost at a 45-degree angle, going from the first letter at the top left all the way down across the page at diagonally to the last letter at the bottom right. And so when the CNC machine would stop, it's like
a sharp line.
You don't have any, like, say the first sentence might be completed.
Yeah.
But then all the rest of the sentences are just getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter down to the bottom, and letters are incomplete. But you can see that perfectly straight line going across diagonally.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it stopped. And so it wouldn't, if it was being done by hand, you know when you look at that that it was not being done by hand.
Right. Nobody cuts like that.
You don't. Yeah, you don't get the wood burner and just start moving in this perfectly. Like you just put a little bit on the S down here, and then you move up to the next line and put a little bit on the P.
Machines do that.
Machines do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's
so
great.
in this temple, if you look through the pictures, and I've got them somewhere. If you look through the pictures, and there are just the wheels are gorgeous, and to me, it's an obvious Yuga cycle. It's Yuga cycle or processional imagery, right? Because they're 12-spoked wheels. And there's images in the hub, and then each spoke has two hubs at either end of it, and it has various figures in each one, and then there's all this stuff in the middle, and there's this one part where there's just this like perfectly flat, straight line going across where all this intricate carving is above it, and then it just stops, and the wall's flat below that, and you're like, okay, totally no one carves like that.
Yeah, totally a machine. And is the wall like flat and smooth?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Right. That's right. So, I think that's about it for this week. What do you say?
Yeah.
Yep. So I've got a few things I want to mention before we end the show here. I got a whole list of stuff. So first of all, I want to mention again, guys, episode 62. Anyone who's interested in arrowheads, go listen to that episode and then look at the show notes, because we post like every arrowhead that was mentioned as far as we could find like Kyle went through it. He's good at like figuring out if they're fakes or not or whatever. So he went through and found every arrowhead type that was mentioned, and we have all of those pictures in the show notes with them labeled. So any beginner in arrowheads, this is a fantastic resource, I think, and we've had other people say that too. So I just wanted to remind you guys of that, and also
I want to say thanks to Clint Beckham again for coming on. Vast stores of knowledge.
Yes, and also that like in the show notes of that show, you can find all of his information if you want to contact him for either going hunting, or arrowhead digs.
Yeah,
and we put a picture of the paid dig, the Mason Creek 4 that we went on with him. There's a picture of that there, so you can see the giant screens and the skid steers dumping dirt and everything. So the other thing I want to mention, I try to remember this, but I always forget. Like anybody using Android, Beyond Pod is a great podcast app.
Yeah.
So we both use it, and we tell everybody to use it. So if you guys have Android phones, get Beyond Pod. It's a great app, and you can get the free version, and it works fine. The paid version is like $6. We both own it because we've been using it for years. But yeah, Beyond Pod is great. And the other thing I want to remind people of is, and I've had people saying this to me, that people are saying, what do they talk about? Remember that the promo is in the feed. You can scroll through the feed and find the promo where it's just like that 1 minute thing or 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes where I just list off all this crap that we talk about in the podcast. So that promo is in there. It's an easy answer to anybody saying, what do they talk about?
Yeah.
And so we also have the website, which we were mentioning earlier, brothersoftheserpent.com. You can go there and you guys should check it out. We've got a bunch of new stuff added there. We have the encyclopedia, which Kyle was talking about, which has a whole huge list of terms and of things that we talk about, names of ancient places, pictures that show you lots of different stuff. It's the encyclopedia is I worked really hard on that, and I'm really proud of it.
It's a one-stop shop for snake facts.
That's right. Lots of great snake facts. We also have the glossary, which is like a sort of a meme library of all the terms that we use, like impossiblocks and butt flaps and quant stuff, and kind of just gives descriptions of what all that stuff means if you're new listeners. The pyramid scheme, you guys can donate to us at the pyramid scheme. It's right there on the website on the upper right. Click the donate button and send us straight to pyramids.
Yeah.
Also, anybody who uses Facebook, we're not on Facebook. We don't do social media. We're terrible at that. But any of you who do use Facebook, you can link shows very easily into Facebook by just sending the link to any one of the blog posts that is one of the shows. So you go to the show you want on the website, get the actual click on the name of the episode that you want, and it'll bring up the actual page for that. Get that URL at the top, and then you post that in Facebook, and it'll pop up as a pre-built link in Facebook.
Cool.
So you guys if you guys would share the shows on Facebook, that would help us out a lot because we don't have it and we're not using it. So that would be awesome if you guys could do that. Also reviews. Any reviews you post, and some people have been doing that, and it's awesome. Any reviews you post on iTunes or any other place, Stitcher, Tuned In, that really helps us a lot for getting new listeners. Oh yeah, and I noticed that somebody accessed us from Hawaii. So if you're not one of our friends who went to Hawaii recently and you're a new listener, please don't die and keep listening.
I know who it is.
Try not to die. Yeah, it's probably that guy, but if it's not, try not to die. Keep listening.
Also, one other thing, if you are an iPhone user, the show notes, the pictures will not come up. And I know you've mentioned this a couple of times. So you actually have to go, there's a link to the website in the show notes, and you can just click that, and it'll open the website page that'll have
in the little podcast app that all iPhones come with. There's a little thing that says "Go to website," and you can use that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing I want to say is, what is it? Oh yeah, you can get also you can comment on the website on any show you want, but you can also get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. And that's it.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you guys very much for being listeners. We really appreciate it. Good night, Adamu.
Always have.
We love you.
Always will.
We always will.